copier. Awesome. So there's a few activities to participate with today. The easiest is probably if you happen to have a smartphone or an iPad or something handy and you can scan the QR code so that you don't have to leave this window, because all of the activities will be shared on the screen. However, if that's not an option, you can always go to the Poll Everywhere website, so Poll EV, and the instructions will all be on the slides to come. So again, if you have that smartphone handy, you can go ahead and scan that QR code and we'll get into our first exercise, which actually it's going to come up again. So you should see a QR code here that you can scan with your camera app, or you can join by the web. You can also participate by text. So lots of ways to get involved. And if none of that works for you, pop it into the chat and Liza can add it to the Poll Everywhere on your behalf. So lots of ways to participate. Really what we wanted to start with today is just this conversation around what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of in community engagement. So there's no right or wrong word. Some of you might already be participating. I've got the instructions here and I'll start to share the responses. I'll give you a minute. Okay, so I'm gonna flip over to the, oh, it shows test. I forgot to clear that response. I love all of this that's coming in. Involvement, engaging with the community, communication, it's challenging, relationships, insight, capacity building, mutual benefits and partnerships, getting feedback or responses, inclusion, so important. So we'll leave it for obtaining views and opinions of persons in a particular community on a particular topic. Collaboration. So you guys don't even need this. This workshop, you already know what a community engagement is. This is awesome. So I'm gonna, we'll stop it here for now, but you can keep adding until we get to the next one if you want. And I'll move on to the next slide. So it seems like our group today has a really strong understanding of what community engagement is, but essentially it's based on this democratic idea that everyone who's affected by an issue that impacts their community should have a say in the decision making around it, right? It's a dialogue, it's a two-way discussion between government and community in which community members can and do influence policymaking or that decision to be made. So say there's a decision to be made about something in the community, you know, what to include in a new park, where the new park should go, if we need a new park. As a government organization, if you get community input and feedback to help make that decision, you're doing community engagement. So in a nutshell, we engage community to help make better decisions. And it goes by many names: public engagement, community engagement, civic participation, public participation, consultation. So it doesn't necessarily mean what you label it, but it really is about that two-way conversation and the process around it and how we go about getting input to help us make or to help government organizations make better decisions. So we can think about, so let's take a moment, just think about, you know, maybe set even your career or your job aside for a moment. Just think about a decision that was made in your community where you live that affected or impacted you personally in some way. Might be policy, service, amenity, infrastructure, lots of things. Just take a moment to think about that. Because essentially when a decision needs to be made about something that affects us, we want to have a say in that decision. That's human nature. As a government organization committed to getting input from the public, we need to determine how much influence the public should have on a decision to be made and how we go about doing that. And just because the public thinks there should be input on a decision doesn't mean there's an opportunity for them to influence that decision. So an example, and this came about this time last year, snow clearing policies, right? The public likely can't influence snow clearing priority, but should they influence how often snow is cleared? It's a bigger budgetary issue or resource issue. But likely, you're going to have policies set around emergency services and all sorts of other things. So yeah, hopefully you've thought of some sort of decision that was made in your community that affected you in some way, shape, or form. So examples might be, and this is a very short list, updated recycling strategy, a new dog park, new trail or path was built close to your home. But the list is really endless. And when you think about that decision that was made or that policy or strategy or infrastructure that came, did you have a say in the decision? Do you think you should have had a say in that decision? And we're going to take a moment. We're going to watch the first 2 minutes. This is the city of Canning in Australia, and they have a really great video that describes how they approach community engagement. So we'll get that started. Oh.
We want the City of Canning to be a fun, safe and great place to live. In order to make decisions about what that might be, we need to work together and listen to each other. When we do this well, we call this effective community engagement. Let's talk about just what that is. When a decision needs to be made about something that affects us, we often have different ideas about what that should be. We all have different wants and needs. One of our fundamental human needs is participation, which is to have a say in decisions that affect us. So what is community engagement? Well, there are two really important parts to it, speaking and listening. It's also not one person speaking and drowning out all other people's voices. Great community engagement is a two-way conversation, a dialogue with a variety of voices heard and expressed. In effective community engagement, you're not sure what the outcome might be when you go into it because the conversation will influence the outcome. It requires speaking, listening, and understanding on all sides of the conversation. At the City of Canning, our vision is to become an engaging organisation that understands community values and priorities. We recognise the need to listen and work together to co-create sustainable solutions and a city that we're proud of. Public input into council decision-making processes is key to good governance. It recognises the collective knowledge and capacity within the community to produce better outcomes. We want to hear how we can improve or create services, facilities and infrastructure. In setting the vision and direction for the city, we want to hear our community's values and priorities now and into the future, as is in the case for the Strategic Community Plan. We will also engage the community under legal requirements such as the Local Government Act, Planning and Development Act, and Local Planning Scheme.
Okay, so that first part of the video really does a good job of just telling their citizens in the city of Canning how they think that community engagement is and what it means to their community and how they're really going to approach it. Sometimes it helps to think about what is not community engagement. So obviously manipulation, one that people get hung up on is making everyone happy or making everyone agree. And particularly council, if you're putting forward a recommendation to council, you're providing a report with the recommendation. When we're doing community engagement, sometimes decision makers get hung up on making everyone happy or making everyone agree. And some way to think of this is like public input might be, a quarter of the decision-making process, might be half, might be, and we don't need to necessarily think of it as a percentage, but it is one piece of making more informed decisions. And it isn't about necessarily making everyone happy. And it's pretty much impossible to do that. Misleading, we see a lot of misleading information in engagement, particularly in surveys. Selective inclusion, someone brought that up about inclusion, but we want to make sure we're not selectively including. Polarization, we never want to pit, say, one resident versus another or stakeholder groups against one another when we're asking for feedback to make a decision. That's not good community engagement. We'll talk more about that. And why is it so important? And I've been mentioning this and it's in the video. It leads to better decision making, right? So community engagement leads to better outcomes for communities, more sustainable decisions, economically viable decisions, technically feasible, environmentally compatible, publicly acceptable or accepted. There's community ownership in that decision. So community engagement, it empowers or provides a way for community to participate in the decision-making process. And then these decision makers are better informed when they make decisions, which leads to better outcomes for the community. And you could add a whole lot more to this slide to, you already did, like when you talked about the first things that you thought of mind when it comes to community engagement. There was stuff about relationship building, trust, all of that is on here. That's a huge reason why community engagement is so important. Encourages collaboration, right? Increases the understanding of issues, but really we get that deep-seated knowledge that we might not get without engaging the community in a decision to be made. Something that, and really improved uptake on services and getting these community members to invest in a long-term vision is huge. It's huge for the future of your community. If we want our community members or residents to take pride or ownership in the decisions that we've made or that government organization has made and invest in this long-term vision, then we need to involve them in the process in some way, shape, or form. So I really like that Chinese proverb. Okay, we're going to go back to poll everywhere. So when you open your device that you used to participate the last time, it should refresh. If it doesn't, you might have to hit refresh. And what we're going to do here now is really just start making a list. Don't overthink it. Types of projects or issues your community will be working on, will be facing in the next few years. Doesn't have to be comprehensive. Again, it's sort of first thing that comes to mind. Strategic planning. More strategic planning. Ooh, a new swimming pool. Garbage services, housing, sector development. To get more information about Connect mass communication. Attracting more business investment. Development, fire truck purchase. Give you another minute or so. Bike paths, rapid transit. Oh, there's someone from Winnipeg that must be on the call. Unless there's rapid transit in another part of the province. New development. Walking path. So you can keep adding to that list because we are housing. We're going to come back to this. Water treatment facilities, these are great. So feel free to keep adding. We are going to come back to this list. So hold that thought. All right. So now we think about the projects or the issues that are facing our communities, and we need to determine when we should engage the community. We'll get to the how next, right? And so the first thing, is there a legal or legislative requirement to engage? Then it's a no-brainer. we absolutely need to engage. Is there real potential, and I bolded that, for community to define or influence the decision or the outcome? And one of the things that they said in that video for the city of Canning, which is true, is that if, if the decision's already been made, don't get input on that. If there's a constraint or something, then we want to make sure that our engagement's meaningful. Do community members expect to have a say? Is there internal commitment? That's huge, right? So many municipalities create a policy of when to engage. We have one at the City of Winnipeg. That's in our policy that I can send to you, or you can look it up. I think it's actually linked in this presentation. And then, are these decision makers committed to upholding your community's guiding principles of engagement? That's huge. And we're going to talk about guiding principles coming up. So these are sort of some of the high level things. It's not necessarily a decision. Some things, it's pretty easy to say, you know what, obviously we're going to engage. Some of them, it's a little bit less clear. That's okay. That's why we work through this, or you create a policy of when to engage within your municipality or your region that you're working within. So now we go back to the list of projects, and we're not voting per se what we like or don't like, but I think you can thumbs up or thumbs down, or is it star or check mark, just to sort of go through the list of whatever everyone put and indicate what you think may be suitable to do community engagement. So if this was a project in your community, or maybe it is, do you think we should do community engagement? So I'll give you a moment to. So no surprise here that many of the things that you put on your list, especially because, I mean, I'm assuming many of you that are on this webinar this morning already have a really good knowledge of what community engagement is. But yeah, a lot of these, oops, I scrolled through too fast. Oh, I don't seem to be able to scroll through the list. I apologize. Maybe I can over here. Oh, here I can. But yeah, restructuring the main street through town, new development, new swimming pool, right? So much of what's happening in our communities, in some way, shape, or form, there's a decision to be made, and there's a decision to be made that we think we should involve the community in that decision-making process. So what we really need to do is, once we understand, the need to engage, we really need to understand the how. And that's where more training and more resources, and we're going to give a high level of that today. So before we get there, this is a list of, and this list is not exhaustive, but it's some types of things that you might think about doing community engagement on. Many of these things were on that last Poll Everywhere slide that you were participating in. So amazing. Community facilities, beautification, the streetscaping for Main Street. There was a new pool in there. There was some land development. There was some strategic planning, bunch of stuff. There was community facilities, I believe. So pretty much everything you said on that list is here. Here's some recent projects from the City of Winnipeg. There's many more, but lots of park improvements or new recreation facilities or improvements. Libraries, lots of them are needing a facelift or getting redone. We're currently making a new plan for downtown called Center Plan 2050. That's a long-term development plan. Lots of road safety, traffic projects. The list goes on, so I won't go through. But essentially, and right now a hot topic is our short-term rental accommodations that we did community engagement on or public engagement on. So lots of opportunities for the public in some way, shape, or form to provide input into the decision-making process. But the big thing is, how do we do this? How do we go about engaging? Which is kind of like, if many of you are economic development officers, right? You maybe know how to think through this as a project, because it's like, where do we start, right? How do we start to get where we need to be? And with community engagement or public engagement, it's all about the guiding principles. And so the International Association for Public Participation is the international leader in models of public participation. So if you do any work in this field, you've probably have some sort of foundational training from IEP2, or you follow their core values or the IEP2 spectrum, which we're going to get to. So most communities or municipalities would adopt their core values based on IEP2, or they would just adopt IEP2's values. We're going to go back to the city of Canning. They have created their own set of core values or guiding principles, and we'll watch another little bit of this video, and I think it will provide a little bit more context. And I just have to fast forward it to that spot.
Community, we've chosen 5 guiding principles that will keep us on the right track. 1. Inclusiveness and accessibility. 2. Integrity. 3. Communication and information. 4. Evaluation and adaptability. And 5. Timeliness. So now I'll tell you a little bit more about what we mean with each of these. 1. Inclusiveness and accessibility. We need to ensure people affected by or who have an interest in a decision will have an opportunity to have a say. 2. Integrity. This means being open to diverse views and being honest about the level of engagement being used. For example, is the decision really open to being influenced through the conversation, or are we really just providing information about a decision that's already been made? We also need to be open about how input has influenced the final decision. 3. Communication and information. It's important to provide people with information so they can fully participate and be clear about why and how they can be a part of it. We need to make sure they're informed about the kind of constraints we have, for example, financial costs, or planning for a future with fewer resources and growing demands upon the limited resources of our planet. 4. Evaluation and adaptability. We need to learn from our projects, what really worked and what didn't. It's important that we document these and continually look for new ways to have a conversation with our community in a way that they want to participate. 5. Timeliness. We should allow enough time to plan and engage so that the conversation can actually have an impact on the decision when appropriate, and that engagement is done at the right time. For example, not during school holidays, Christmas break, or at a time when the decision has already been made. So these are the principles that shall guide us in our community engagement. To find out...
Okay, so I think that provides some great context about how the city of Canning has developed their guiding principles and applies them to community engagement. At the city of Winnipeg, we have our own principles of engagement, and I know the province has their own principles of engagement that they've developed as well. And I won't go through this long list, just to say that it's very important to have this, and we continually go back to this when we're working with project teams, when we're working on projects within our own small team at the city. We come back and it's sort of a checklist for us, right? And we're always working at getting better at all of these things, but having this as a foundation that we can go back to ensure that we're approaching engagement the way we want to, and the way that we can do meaningful engagement with community. So now we start on the planning side, the sort of meat and potatoes of this all. And you need to create an engagement strategy. And I would suggest using a template. We have a template at the city we use. Happy to share it. If anyone sends me an email, I can send it to you. I think the province has a template that they use. There's also lots of templates online, and I'll provide some resources at the end of this. And it's really just a way, no different than creating a business plan or anything else, just to help guide the information that we need to pull together. We also need to identify the staff and financial resources. And so if you don't have internally the staff, that might mean hiring a consultant. The financial resources, I think sometimes we underestimate, the costs associated with doing engagement. So whether that's if we don't have any tools like online tools or facilities we need to rent or food we need to provide or honorariums or transportation if we're reducing barriers for someone to get there. But essentially, you need to have some financial resources to be able to support the engagement. And you want to have those subject matter experts to assist in planning. They might be a project lead. And then you want to have the engagement team with these skills. So at the City of Winnipeg, our small team does everything from start to end. So we do the engagement planning, event planning, survey design, facilitation, data analysis, communications, promotions, digital web, we do it all. But we also work with consultants sometimes when projects are really huge and we don't have enough resources in-house. Then we work with consultants on projects, either to piece out some of these skills or to work in concert with us at the city. So it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to have all of these skills in-house, but you do need all of these skills within your project team to be able to actually successfully and meaningfully do engagement. And really important is creating that plan to report back to the community. And that goes back to our guiding principles, right? There's accountability, there's trust, there's integrity. So telling people what we heard and how we use that information in the decision-making process. So that's sort of the overall for planning. But the first step really is defining the project. And maybe at this point, identifying the stage you are in the decision-making process. You might be at the very beginning where you're still sort of defining the problem, or you might be, halfway through and you have a couple of options and you need to get feedback on those options. But what is that decision to be made? How will it impact the community? So how will that new walking trail, how will that new bike path, how will that new pool, how will that, the policies that might flow out of a strategic plan, land development, how is that going to impact the people of the community maybe now and 20 years from now for something like that? What's the goals of the project and of the engagement, right? Like how is engagement going to help move the project along? And then what's really critical, what's on the table and what's off? So if you already know that you have these constraints, maybe they're financial constraints, or that this part of a policy isn't going to be changed, don't ask people for feedback on it. And that goes back to that video for the city of Canning in Australia, right? Like really taking that time to figure out what can people provide, what hasn't been decided yet, and what can be decided or help to be decided by the public, and then the risks of engaging or not engaging. And that's usually part of your engagement strategy template will have something to do with risks. So we've defined what the project is, what the problem is. Now we need to think about who, right? So we kind of it's kind of like from a business perspective, we wouldn't just say, oh, who's your customers? Oh, people. Who are we engaging with? We need to identify those specific groups of people and stakeholders. So the individuals, groups, and organizations that are either impacted by or have influence over the decision to be made. This isn't a complete list. This is something that you would use maybe to start your process when you're going to do stakeholder mapping, which is on the next slide, but really to just identify and think about that you need to think about all of the individual groups and organizations that are impacted by or have influence over the decision to be made, because you might approach them differently. In fact, you will approach them differently. So there is a process called stakeholder mapping. Some people just start with, oh, let's just make a list. It can be a very actually interactive exercise to do with your project team and maybe some community members or some known stakeholders to really flesh out who the individuals, groups, and organizations are, and then to plot them on a grid of how much influence they have on the decision to be made and how much impact, because we're going to want to make sure we reach the people differently, say, that are highly impacted but have low influence. So there's going to be different strategies to how we approach those different groups of stakeholders through our project. So this is a really important process that sometimes gets sort of glossed over, and we just treat everyone the same. Oh, residents of, or stakeholders, and we think about some of these community groups. And then we want to think about, how much. So once we have identified these groups, these stakeholders, we want to think about where do they fit into the spectrum of engagement. So this is from IAP2. A lot of people adopt exactly the IAP2 spectrum of engagement. Some people create their own based on this. But the spectrum of engagement is really about how much will your stakeholders be involved in a project and how much impact do they have on the decision to be made. And then everything flows from there. What is our goal? What is our promise to the public? So a lot might depend on the stage of the project that you're in, so the step of the decision-making process, essentially. And we really want to take some time to think about this. So for example, you might involve certain stakeholders to help come up with options, and then you might consult community members on those options. So I know this is pretty small font. You probably can't read it, so I'll give you a really quick overview. Inform is essentially the promise to the public is we'll keep you informed. You're not asking them for feedback. So a lot of regions, municipalities actually don't think of inform as part of the spectrum because you're going to inform everybody anyway. So think of that as not getting feedback. The next level is consult. So you might have a list of options already prepared, and you want to get their feedback on it. So the promise to the public will keep you informed, will listen and acknowledge your concerns and aspirations, and will provide feedback on how public input influenced the decision. So sort of the lowest level of engagement. But a lot of engagement with the general public happens at the consult level. Involve will work with you to ensure your concerns and aspirations are directly reflected in the alternatives developed and provide feedback on how input influenced the decision. So that might mean you are involving community groups, individuals, stakeholders to help you come up with the options, with the alternatives. Collaborate. We will look to you for advice and innovation in formulating solutions and incorporating advice and recommendations. This is not plain language into the decisions to the maximum extent possible. I think we understand what it means to collaborate. So really involving, it might be a really small group of stakeholders that you work with, say, to collaborate in engagement on a project. And then at the very end of the spectrum is empower. You don't see this very often. There is a funny case out there, I think it's in the UK, where the government or the government organization, empowered residents to name a ship or a boat or something, and the response came back with Boaty McBoatface. You can look it up. It's pretty hilarious. But that was just like the public, like, ha ha ha, you empowered us to make this decision, and we're calling this Boaty McBoatface. So we might think about empower in terms of when we go to the ballots to vote in an election time. But typically you don't think of that in the sense of community engagement. This is a fun sort of example that was come up with by a library county staff in the States. So it is a way of really communicating and really getting the point across of what the spectrum is. So we'll go through this example. If we were in person, we could do an exercise around this and have lots of fun. But let's assume for this webinar this morning, for the purposes of this, the decision to be made is what should we have for dessert tonight? And the most impacted stakeholder is a family member. And let's think of this as a youth, like your children, grandchildren, niece, nephew, something like that, a kid, okay? On one end, you are telling this child you are having cherry pie for dessert. That's inform. You're just telling them, you're not asking them for feedback. Look, it's cherry pie tonight. On the very other end, you're putting all the decision-making power in the hands of the kids. No matter what they tell you, that's what you're having for dessert. You might give them money, you might get them to bake it, or whatever it is the kids say, that's what's for dessert tonight. That could be scary. Most engagement happens somewhere in between. So consult. You are thinking, well, what do you want? Chocolate chip cookies tonight or something else? What do you think? That might be consult. You might give them 3 options. and you want to find out which option is going to be the best. And you're not necessarily trying to please them. You're just trying to find out which option might be the best. And then you factor other things in your decision-making process, like cost and how far is the store to get it? Do I have enough time to bake it? That sort of stuff. Involve. Now we actually want to ask the kids to help us come up with the options. So we ask them, do you want something healthy, decadent? They say decadent. Then you ask them if they want it to be sweet or savory. They say sweet. Should it be hot, room temperature, cold? They say room temperature. You go through, and they asked, what about a flan? I don't know any kids who would pick a flan, but that was the process. They really involved the kids to come up with options and then said, hey, well, what do you think about this? On the collaborate spectrum, you discuss and you decide what to have for dessert. You might even take the kids shopping with you. You might even pull the ingredients and ask them to bake with you. So I think that's a really cute example to demonstrate how this can be applied to your community projects. Another way of just thinking about it. If we had time, I don't think we will. We could run through something like this with one of your projects that's coming up in your communities for the next year, or maybe you just start thinking about one of those projects you identified and how you would apply this. And the next thing is to come up with techniques. So what we hear so often, and you've probably heard it, is, okay, we need to figure out where we should put this walking path or where this park should go or something about this pool. Let's do a town hall and a survey. Done. So we jump to the techniques before we know who we're engaging, how we're engaging them. You know, we jump to the general public as well, right? We don't necessarily think about all those steps. So you might do tons of engagement first before you go to all community residents. You might have, you might be collaborating or consulting or involving a group to identify maybe even where it should be or all sorts of things. Once we get to that point, then we can start to think about techniques. And there are way more techniques than is on here. This is a small sample, but we have to inform people to be able to provide meaningful engagement. I think little short videos, if you have the capacity, are great. We did a Transit Plus no-show cancellation policy recently, and we did a video that's under 3 minutes. I think it actually might be just over 2 minutes to communicate what the proposed policy is. Great way to inform people so they have enough information to be able to participate. And then we won't go over all these techniques. Again, we could workshop all of them. We could workshop certainly how to design a survey and any of these other things. But all this is to say is that this point in your strategy comes after so much work has been done or so much thought process in your strategy has already been put together. And then we can think about our approach. Right now we can start to pull it all together, right? Who is that stakeholder group? What's our objective with that group? What technique makes sense? Where on the spectrum are we engaging that group? And what supports or considerations do we need to think about? And also what stage we are in the decision-making process, right? So this might be iterative. This might change throughout the course of a project. So we're going to run through a little case study. We don't have a lot of time. I want to save time for questions. But let's think about a landfill, right? So the decision statement is within 1 year, we need to select a site for a new 50-year municipal landfill to serve the region. That is the decision statement. Then we've gone through, I've listed a few of the stakeholder groups. The key stakeholders is something you definitely get out of doing your stakeholder mapping. We've got our objectives, our techniques, where they would fit on the spectrum, so that, you could write underneath the promise to those stakeholder groups if that would help it to cement more in your mind. And then in any sort of supports or considerations, right? So some of these stakeholder groups we're going to engage much before we go to community members. So before we even get to the community about the landfill, we might have a standing website or somewhere some information that says, hey, our municipality needs a new landfill. We're now engaging with interested or communities of interest and stakeholders or some sort of language just to give them a high level of, this is our decision statement, this is the problem, and we'll come back and get feedback. But it might even just be information about the project. Let people know this is coming. In the meantime, we've set up an advisory committee with key stakeholders. We've started to have some meetings with nearby residents, making sure that their concerns are heard. But we've really developed, working with these key stakeholders, where's the potential sites, what's going to be the evaluation criteria. So really at the start of the project. And then we work through, and throughout this entire process, what we see more public facing is this public stuff, right? But there's so much happening probably with other community groups or stakeholder groups that help you to get to the decision to be made. It's figuring out who to involve, when, and how. And once you've done all that, one slide to sum that up, we really, really need to close loop. Again, this goes back to our guiding principles. We need to let the public know, and stakeholders, right, how their input influenced or affected the decision. So what we heard, how it was considered. Often heard of what we heard report, or what was said report. We call them public engagement summaries at the City of Winnipeg. And we want to make sure we publicly post the report and notify people. So if you've established an email database of people who are interested in the project, send them an email and let them know, give them regular updates, or maybe post it on a community Facebook group or your town website, or however it is you want to make sure that people know, or putting it in, doing some mail outs, or putting it in any other way that you can let people know what's going on with the project. And that this information is available. And then finally, just to wrap it up, so we still have 10 minutes or so for questions, is some tools. So there is, this link has a ton of digital engagement tools that was put together by practitioners during COVID, when that's the only option we had. SurveyMonkey has some great resources just for making sure that you avoid bad survey questions. Again, we could have an entire session on survey development. The Hemingway app is really great for writing in plain language. You can, if you've written something, you can pop it into the app, and it's free, and it'll tell you what grade it's at. We just actually passed a plain language policy at the City of Winnipeg, so we're striving for all public-facing materials to be written at a grade 8 level or lower. And when you're not used to writing that way, it can take a little bit of time. Something else that I've been playing with for helping to write plain language is actually using ChatGPT. So using the free version of it. Well, right now it's free. And anything I know that's public facing, so it's not sensitive in nature, you can pop it into ChatGPT and say things like, please write plain language, or please write to a grade 8 level, and it'll provide some suggestions. So that can be a great tool as well, because sometimes we know the subject matter so much, or our subject matter experts on the project team do, that we forget that we're communicating with the public. We need to make things so that everyone can understand the project and what we need their feedback on. So we need to do that in a plain language way. And there are tons and tons of resources out there. So here are a few with links. This is it's an older snapshot, but this is our Engage Winnipeg website. You're welcome to pop by and see what projects we're working on these days. And then there's a bunch of networks that you can join. So IEP2 Canada has a Prairie chapter. You don't have to be a member of IEP2, like a paid, you can have, to be able to join the Prairie chapters chat. You just have to navigate through there to join it. And they have like a quarterly lunch and learn. It's really great. Apolitical, many of you probably are aware, but there's tons of resources on apolitical, including those for engagement. And then there is a groups IO for public participation, can't talk today, staff in Canadian municipalities. So if you work for a municipal or regional government, you can click on this link and you can get approval to join this groups. And it's essentially an online forum for everything engagement, and it is absolutely wonderful. So lots of resources out there. And then finally, there's us. We are all here to support each other. So I would be more than happy to take a call or set up a meeting or shoot emails back and forth. I am fortunate that I get to do this full time as my job, so I have more time to dedicate to it. And yeah, I'm here as a resource. And if I was going to offer any sort of final tips, I would say start slow. It's overwhelming. Just like, if you're starting a new project, but thinking about how do I weave engagement into this project? How does it help to inform the decision-making process? And sometimes that can be a lot to unpack, but just start slow. We're going to make mistakes. We learn from our mistakes every single day in everything that we do. And engagement, I think, is no different. And yeah, I think that is about it for the presentation. And there is 9 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'll take questions. You can well, maybe Liza will facilitate. You can unmute or pop them in the chat, but
Yeah,
I'll stop.
thanks, Lindsay. I did put in the chat that we will send out Lindsay's presentation where those links will be live. I'll get that out to you very shortly. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, like pop them in the chat or just unmute yourself. I'm not muting anyone. You should be able to unmute yourself or raise your hand.
Or maybe I talk too much too fast.
No, it was awesome. I mean, one thing I thought about when you were speaking is, about going to, when you're engaging with municipalities to either inform about a decision rather than get input for a decision. Like, is there still some engagement that you would do even though you have maybe a decision made? You would still engage in a certain way?
So this is where like that word engagement we get hung up on. And I know a lot of project teams do, but essentially if a decision, you're always getting feedback, right? If you run a
Yeah.
program, you're always getting feedback. You're not going to not take feedback because you're not doing, but the difference is like, are you actively creating a strategy around how it's going to impact? So you might get customer feedback from residents who have a lot of feedback about the recreation facility, and hopefully you're tracking that feedback, but you can do that without, maybe you've already made a decision that, and this is very simplistic, but that like this fall, we're going to have swimming and basketball and badminton, and that decision's made. So, yeah, tell us what you think. And maybe in the course of operations, we'll think about making changes like that simplistic way. But like, we do want to be careful that if a decision is made, we're pretty clear that like the path is going here, that decision's been made. A lot of times people don't hear about it until it's like, oh, they never asked me. It's like, well, we did give you a chance, but now you're just finding out about it because now the local newspaper's picking it up, not back when we were asking for feedback. So some of that is on us. How can we be better at making sure people know when they have an opportunity? But we really want to be careful that we're clear, like this decision's made. We're still here to always hear you, but this decision's made.
Good. Let's maybe do another call if anyone has any questions for Lindsay before we are about 6 minutes left for time if anybody does have any questions.
And even let RMed know if this is something you're interested in. Maybe you don't have questions now. If there's any of these topics that you want to learn more about, we can dive deeper into one thing or another. This was really a big overview of engagement in a short amount of time.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to remind everyone too that any of our upcoming webinars we usually post to social media, but they are also on our events calendar on our website. So I believe we have another one coming up in a couple of weeks with futurepreneur Noah Wilson's going to be leading a discussion with and a panel of Indigenous business owners. So if you're interested in that, is on our website for more information. Yeah, if anybody has any want to dive deeper into any of the aspects of engagement that Lindsay talked about, we would definitely look at further utilizing her expertise and either doing another webinar or potentially even a bit of a education kind of session as well with her. So be sure to reach out and let us know. I think she's popped her email address into that into the chat box, but like I mentioned before, we will get everybody a copy of her presentation with the links in it. And if
Awesome.
no one has any questions, then I guess I'll wrap things up for the day.
Thank you so much for having me. It was awesome to, anytime I get a chance to talk about this, I'm super passionate about it. And again, even if it's like 6 months later and you just started a project, I'm here. You can reach out and love to have a chat.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.